you everyone for joining us this afternoon. The two of us that are making the presentation today are Kyle Smith and I'm Jervis, and we represent several hundred residents here in Waimea. We filed a lawsuit against Pioneer International Highway Company. Kyle, can everyone hear me back there in the back? Can. Hello, is that better? Is that better? Okay. The reason that we filed this lawsuit was that the residents of Waimea called us into town in the fall of 2010. They had organized themselves, and you know, Waimea, we need everyone to understand that Waimea is a rural community, a very close-knit community that got each other's back, and it takes a lot to push them out of their comfort zone and into litigation. This wasn't an easy decision for them. You know, they took this for a decade before, you know, actually calling lawyers in. And so Little Waimea is the first community in the state of Hawaii to stand up to one of these GMO companies. And I'm very proud of them. The other thing that we want to say right up front, that the workers at the GMO companies, the workers who have families of their own and who go to work and do the best they can every day, and that's their job. This is not about vilifying the workers. You know, these are hardworking people. They don't make the policies, they don't set the procedures. What this lawsuit is about is suing the corporate entity for its policies and how it implements its agricultural operational activities that generate both fugitive dust and pesticide spray drift. So we're going after the corporate entity. We realize that people, everyday people, sometimes get caught in the mix. And let's not leave our aloha at the door. Okay, having said that, I'm going to let Kyle pick up on who we are.
Aloha. Thank you guys for coming. Can everybody hear me as well, or do I need to speak up? Is this okay? Like, raise your hand if you can hear me in the back. Is that better? Okay, perfect. We're here for a couple different reasons today. And I see both people we represent and also people who are just, you know, Kauai residents from all over the island that want to have more information. And what's going on today is a little bit different than most. This almost never happens. I mean, from Jerry and I both being involved in a lot of lawsuits. Some of you may have been involved in lawsuits before. This is not the typical kind of information sharing that occurs. And I mention that for an important reason. Usually what happens is somebody gets hurt, they get upset, they bring a lawsuit, it gets resolved, it's all confidential, no one really knows what happened. And frankly, there's way too much secrecy about the way the civil justice system works, in my opinion, okay? Because these things happen, something's going on over there, and you never hear about the result. And we wanted this to be different. And so people who have been our clients for a long time, for several years, can tell you that we had meeting after meeting in order to understand, you know, what they needed, in order to relay information. The atrazine sort of conference that was several months back was one of the things that we put on, and the whole point is to make sure that, you know, the community wants to know what's going on next door. And that's not that outrageous of a thing to ask for, to know what kind of chemicals are being used by your neighbor. And so when we very first got involved in this lawsuit, we tried to reach agreement, tried to mediate, to work things out with Pioneer, and that failed. And that took almost a year. And then only at that point did really the litigation get started. And I'm not going to talk much about the litigation today. This is more about the actual pesticides that were used. But when Jerry and I first got involved, I want to bring that up because from the community standpoint, there was a huge amount of dust, but there's also the uncertainty as far as what were the actual pesticides. And so the question is, you know, why are we here today? we've kind of covered this, but it's that Waimea stood up, and they stood up together, and right now, they're the community that's accomplished the most, in my opinion, in all of Hawaii, as far as understanding what kind of chemicals are being used at these operations. And the basic thing is just that people have a right to know what those chemicals are. And so again, why is this important? I'm going to just walk through this today. I'll show you why it's important. Hope you guys can see that. That's why it's important. That's where many, not most of the people in this room live. Over here on the right, step away so it doesn't. Over on the right is the Pioneer operation. And everyone knows which way the wind blows here most of the time when the trade winds are blowing. It's across those fields into this town. Can you guys see that at all? Can you see where the red X is?
Yeah.
Can we maybe close that? Can you go close that key? Well, that red X is basically where you guys are sitting, okay? That's not where most of our clients live, that's where we are today. Roughly right in that location. And this is part of the Pioneer Fields, upwind, up the hill. It's roughly 1,000 acres. Not everybody knows that. And it's a research center, and that's important. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later today, about what that means for this community and other communities. And the question is, and it's about 1,000 acres. The question is when chemicals get used on those fields, where do they go? And this is what's called a dispersion model. Okay? What it shows is it looks at things like wind, looks at things like topography, right? And it basically says, here's where things are likely to blow. And when you put stuff up on the poly, up on those fields, where they're likely to go is into Waimea. You guys see the red X again. These are the Syngenta fields, which, right out that door. We're going to talk about that some today too, about the Waimea air quality study that was done, about the air quality levels in this school and in this area. This is actually an interesting dispersion model because if you look right here, I guess I have to stand right here. Those far right fields are going to disappear. Those are essentially where the fields where they moved back. And that shows what happens essentially when you set up things like buffer zones. You guys see where the X is, right? So, sure. My point is that if you look at when they're plowing and when they're spraying right up next to the school, right? And then what happens when you move away? The lines shift, right? The pesticides don't go as far, particularly at those fields, because remember, for most of the time, the wind's pushing this way, right? It's pushing, so absolutely, nobody can tell you with absolute certainty where the pesticides that are showing up in this school come from. Now, I can tell you what I think the most likely explanation is, or explanations, right? But you can't say it with absolute certainty. But you can say that when you look at these kind of models and you know the local weather conditions, what's likely. That's something all of you guys who live here actually live with day in and day out. When you see dust up on the hillside blow up 300 feet high and blow into the town, or if the wind's blowing from the other way and dust is coming from the other way, that happens as well.
What do the different color lines stand for around? You saw the different color lines and some figures up there on the...
Yeah, sure. Well, let me go back, because this is a clear one. What it basically shows is these bright green lines on the right is an outline of Pioneer Fields, okay? And if dust or pesticides, this is based on the assumption that dust and pesticides get into the air, where that's going to be expected to go, based upon the weather conditions and the topography. And then those lines, as they change colors, essentially it disperses, so the concentrations get less and less the farther you get away. That makes sense, right? A lot of people are wanting to ask questions. I'm going to try to take some of these, okay? But what I mostly appreciate, or what I'm going to try to do most at the end, but Jim, sir, if you want to...
Yeah, I just wanted to know the distance from the fields to your first line, second line, and third line, because the bill proposed only has a 500-foot range, and I have studies that would no wind and 70-degree ambient temperatures, these vapors go up to more than 1 mile with no wind and not attachment to dust particles. So I just wondered what your ranges were there.
So these ranges, I actually can't tell you that, and so I don't know exactly how many feet. It's several hundred. Well, there is the mile, I guess, but as far as the specific distance at the bottom, that's 1 mile is the white line, okay?
So
Now look,
some of these are more than miles.
it can be, but again, I don't want to get bogged down into the models today, okay? Because it depends on a lot of factors. Things like the concentration it's actually sprayed at, the actual location. We're going to talk about some of that today. The goal today is not to give you guys all the answers because we don't have them, but it's certainly to try to point out some of the things that we are finding and to get everybody engaged on these issues. So you've got more knowledge to go forward, okay? So I'm going to jump through some of these models real quick. Jerry might want to jump in on this, but the very first thing we were asked when we got into the community back in late 2010 was, can you please ask DuPont Pioneer to at least tell us when they're spraying pesticides? You want to take this just quick? Yeah.
So the community, obviously, and by the way, I apologize. I wanted to acknowledge the presence of council members Yokimura and Bainham. Thank you very much for showing up. We also got an email response from Council Member Raposa, who's going to be coming a little later today, and Council Chair Fufaro, and Council Member Nakamura, I'm sorry. And then Fufaro wasn't able to make it, but he's going to give us an opportunity to talk to him sometime later next week. Just one thing before we talk about the warnings and the notice. These dispersion models, without getting into detail, take in a number of variables. They take in the topography, they take in the wind speed, the wind direction, the type of chemical that's used, whether it's chlorpyrifos or whatever. They drift at different rates, as you probably well know. The important thing is when they're done well, and we believe we have the best people working on this, when they're done well, they've been used by the EPA. Routinely, EPA uses computer dispersion models, number one. They've been admitted into courts into all kinds of jurisdictions in the United States, including the courts in Hawaii. So at the end of the day, if they're done well and the variables are inputted, they're good evidence. The other point I wanted to make about the buffer zone and the distance, as we were told at the first reading, that the public hearing that's set for the 31st of July, that is the time for us to come in with our concerns and our issues. That's when the council takes in the information and makes the adjustments. So that'll probably be a good time to bring your study and your information, and your questions at that point in time.
What about soft kill that's happening?
Well, we're gonna talk about cocktails in a little bit.
Soft kill, what's happening to our population here because of the pesticides and herbicides. Soft kill,
What is soft kill?
meaning similar to thalidomide, next generation, people that die, stillborn deaths, retardations.
Yeah, we're gonna get into the health risks associated with pesticides when we get into that part of the presentation. But going back now historically, when we were first brought on board, the community wanted a couple of things immediately. They wanted to know when they were spraying up on the hill, and they wanted to know when they were generating the dust, okay? They also wanted to know what they were spraying. And it's taken us, well over 2 years of litigation to find out what they were spraying. And that's a handout that we're going to be giving out today, and Kyle's going to be taking you through it, the actual pesticides that they sprayed. But from the very beginning, we were able to negotiate with Pioneer a notification process. So every Friday, we just got one yesterday, we get 2 emails that come out of there. It gives us a spray schedule for the following week, and I can tell you that they spray 5-6 days a week, morning and night. And they give us the land preparation schedule, which is the harrowing and the plowing that generates the dust for the upcoming week. So the community got that right away. So we get the email, it goes to a key committee, and the key committee and the community emails it out to the entire client base. And for those who don't have emails, they communicate that information through other means. So what's going to be happening today is we're going to be trying to fulfill the second of those promises, that we're going to tell the community what exactly they're spraying, and there's some uglies out there.
So, as Jerry said, this is an example of just the notice, but the problem, of course, is it doesn't say what they're actually doing. This is, we may be spraying on these days. It doesn't show what was actually used, when, and where, right? So, what we basically prepared, because this is the difficult part, is there's a lot of different kinds of pesticides. So we have a handout. I may not have made enough. I have 200 of them. But, so maybe just households can take one. But it's essentially a handout. I've got it for at the end. It's basically a list of all the different pesticides from these pesticide records that we receive and have tried to assemble for you. And then we've also tried to put those pesticide types into the different classifications. And the reason that's important is because, there may be, for example, organophosphates might be 3 or 4 different kinds of types of pesticides. There might be carbamates, there might be other examples. And so on this handout, it has that information, okay? But just in broad terms, there's about 90 different pesticide formulations that are used from 2007 to 2013, give or take. The reason this is sort of hazy is because pesticide formulations may change slightly over time. They may get a new type of pesticide. They may call it something different, slightly different mixture, this kind of thing. The real nuts and bolts is there's a little better than 60 or so active ingredients. Now, even active ingredients is a hazy term itself, because the active ingredient is the chemical that's designed to kill in that cocktail. But there's a lot of other stuff doing things too, and this is the whole Roundup issue, and what are the other things that hold that pesticide and to apply it. Okay, but these are the basic active ingredients that are reported with the EPA. And the primary ones are, well, it's off the bottom, but essentially it's insecticides, herbicides, fungicides are the most common pesticides used. Now let's talk about, just in big general terms, the classifications. We have some information. If you took these 90-odd trade names, it's 60 or so different kinds of chemicals, and you broke them down, there's a lot of different types. And some of these are not that bad, okay? Soaps, different kinds of, often the microbiologicals are not as dangerous. But there's also some that are not good, things that we've all heard about. The, carbamates, organophosphates, things like chlorpyrifos. If you wanted to look at, the nicotinoids and neonicotinoids for any beekeepers who are here and are concerned about the impact of bee populations, things like imidacloprid. These things are also being used. So these are sort of broad categories. If you break, and the reason we're presenting it this way, guys, is because we have, there's thousands of different entries, okay, that have to be collected and assembled. And so there's no way you can sit down and look through every one in this kind of setting. But essentially, this is a graph over this, 5-6 year period that shows the average number of applications per application day. So they don't use pesticides every single day, but on the days they do use pesticide, they're often using its multiple applications. And the reason, and this is important, the reason is that's a research facility. And what that means is that rather than the big, the old McDonald that we grew up with, has the big field, and they plant fence row to fence row, and you plow it once, maybe you do use chemicals, you spray it once or twice, and then you harvest, right? What's going on up there is you subdivide these big fields into lots of different pieces, and you have different tests going on in different pieces, and you spray this chemical and you spray that chemical over here, or maybe on this schedule, and so they're keeping track of all this. So there's lots of different applications and different kinds of chemicals being used in the same day, same general time frame. That's an important consideration too, that other people have spoken to as far as pesticide combinations. We did this graph just to give you an idea, so sort of the periods of the year where the most application is going on. And if you guys can see this, essentially there's several peaks. It's kind of over the winter. It's sort of starting, typically, historically, it picks up right about now. And then there's usually sort of a March-April peak. And this usually corresponds with the planting seasons. Up, at least at the Waimea Research Center, there are 3 main planting seasons. The summer's off, and so they really plant heavy in the fall and heavy in the spring. And then that those seasons may be slightly tweaked depending on the field you're in. Okay, so that's why you see these different spikes and then different periods that are not as much. But still, it's being used throughout the year. Okay, Jerry asked me, just to make sure this is clear, average number of applications would be, for example, in 2009, for all the days they sprayed pesticide, okay? So let's say they sprayed pesticide 300 days, all right? For every single one of those days, if you took the average number of applications on those days, it would be close to 16 applications on those, so 16 today, 16 tomorrow, 16 the next day, that kind of thing. And again, this is because it's a research facility. There's multiple fields being sprayed at different times, multiple combinations being used.
So those are average numbers. So what are the top ranges? Just out of curiosity.
That's a good question. It's much higher.
We didn't hear the
The question was, these are average numbers you're presenting, so what's your sort of top end, low end? I told him I'm not 100% sure, but it's quite high. Yes, Councilman.
What is the substance, amount of substance per application?
That's an excellent question too. Maybe this kind of deals with both, I think. I don't have so the question again was, yes, her question was, for these different applications, what was the average amount? Is it a whole lot or a whole little? I don't have it broken down that way. I could get it to you. But if you wanted to look at, let me get to it. I've got a slide come up in a second that kind of gets to that point. This is by chemical class, the average frequency.
It just looked like from that chart, it's like up to 30 is the highest per month. Is that
ladder.
So the question is looking at the average number of, there's some periods of the year where it's closer to 30,
30 per
okay? Yeah, that would be in that month, 30 applications per day, number of applications. That's right. But still, I don't know what the absolute highest would be for those specific days. I could go back and dig deeper, but again, it's how do you present the information most effectively. So this is important because the organophosphate herbicides are being applied on average about every 3.5 days, okay? The pyrethroids being applied about every 4 days. The organophosphate insecticides, different, same kind of basic class, but different target. That's things like chlorpyrifos, being applied about every 4 days. If you go, I'm going to butcher this name, I'm going to apologize. If you go down and look at the chloroacetinolide herbicide, it's about 5 or 6 down. That's on average about every 6 days. That's things like metolachlor, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Okay. So this is, if you look at over time, this is how many average days of the year. So if you got about 300, if you have 365 days in the year, how many of those days are they actually applying pesticides? And it changes, it goes up and down, but on average, it's about 65% of the days of the year. So when people from Waimea tell you, and have told people, that we feel like they're spraying almost every day, they're not making that up. There are days of the year, there are years where it's closer to 80% of the days of the year. Yeah, sure.
First of all, Councilmember Yukimura, how we have this data is we have the spray sheets, the pesticide application spray sheets for each of those application days. So that data can be sliced up in a whole bunch of different ways, and those data sheets have the day, the time, the quantity, the location, the wind speed, all of the variables that you need. The area, so we can get, whatever that information to you, okay?
Yeah, I'll just explain, not exactly, because typically it's a little more complicated than that. So what you'll have is, and I'll show you a record in a second, you have a huge record of this day, this little subplot field, let's say it's 101, it's a subplot the size of this room or something, right? And then it'll have the chemical, the amount, and there's no way to tie where that field 101 is up on the plateau until you have a map that also has the fields for that season, that growing season, because field 101 this year might be different field 101 in the spring. So it's very complicated. It's a huge amount of work.
I want to say, I'm one of the people on the scoop, and every Friday we get an email that tells us what days they're going to spray and what hours they're going to spray, and that they will let us know if there's any change. And in all these months, they have never, ever sent us a correction. And that's an insult. That means that when the wind got too high, they didn't let us know, when the weather changed, when the wind changed. So somebody is not disclosing. Okay?
So we're going to talk, I'll show you one of those records in a minute, okay? And then it'll be a little more apparent. This gets more to your question, which is the total amount used, because if you're spraying a whole lot of times for just a little bit, that might not be that big a deal compared to spraying just a couple times, but a whole bunch, right? So if you basically break down the application by the amount used in a year, again, the ones, I always butcher this, the chloroacidolides, gosh, I can't do that ever. The metolachlor is basically what it is. That's the one that gets used a lot. The OPs, the organophosphate, the I is for insecticides. This is the chlorpyrifos. The carbamates, that's another one. I've got some of these broken down in a second. Again, the organophosphates. And it sort of trails down from there, okay? So again, the question is, why is this important for us today, sitting here? And this is the reason. Atrazine was found in test results in this school, in the drinking water, okay? BHC was found in Waimea Canyon Middle School. DDT found in Waimea Canyon Middle School. Most of you guys know this if you sat through the Waimea Canyon Air Quality Study, okay? Bifenthrin found in Waimea Canyon Middle School. Metolachlor found in Waimea Canyon Middle School. Chlorpyrifos found in Waimea Canyon Middle School. Down at the bottom, and again, I apologize, it's cut off by the screen, the atrazine result. You want to touch on that? I can show you the slide. Yeah. So this is the USDA that did the test of drinking water. It's February 2011, and there's an atrazine finding. I'll be the first to admit it's not a lot, right? But it is being found here, and the question then becomes, in fact, if any of you guys followed the studies on the atrazine and who sat through the conference that we had on atrazine, it doesn't take a whole lot to have some really nasty consequences, okay? And that's the important thing to take home. And most of the really, I guess you could call it exciting science, or the really cutting edge science on pesticides, deals with these very low levels. This is something that Professor Hayes talked about. And what it basically is, let me get to this in just a second, is that basically the historical model, it's been outdated for a long time, but is that if you have a little bit of something, it's not that bad. If you have a whole lot, it's going to poison you, right? Water's like that. You can die if you drink too much water. A little bit of water is not such a problem, right? So the more you get, the worse the impact. The problem is that chemicals in your body don't always work that way. And a good example is estrogen. If you have a little bit of estrogen, it makes women fertile. If you have a whole lot of estrogen, it's called birth control. So these chemicals, sometimes very small amounts, can have impacts. And then as the amount builds up in your body, your immune system kicks on and it pushes it out, and then you get more and more and it overwhelms your immune system, and then you can have another impact. And so the fact that small levels or low levels of these, atrazine for example, is being found, I think experts that work on atrazine, is definitely something we should at least take seriously and figure out where it's coming from. Yes, in the back?
Has there been any studies done anywhere that studies the long-term effect of low doses, like these little kids will grow up their whole lives here with low doses of atrazine and all these other chemicals?
So the answer, the question real quick, let me, hold on. The question real quick was, have there been any studies anywhere done regarding low dose impacts of chemicals, say to children, and then you have low dose over a long time, what the long-term impact? The short answer to that question is no. And this is the kicker. The reason, let's say everyone here that wants to volunteer for you to bring your children to me, and I'm going to dose them at low doses, with chemicals and we're going to figure out what it did to them in 20 years. No one does it. The reason is it's not ethical to do, right? That's why you use rats, rabbits, other animals to test these chemicals. There are epidemiological studies out there that look at some impacts from pesticides where you do have chronic historical low doses. I don't have those on my fingertips, but again, the point of today is to provide you guys with information. And the internet and libraries and medical doctors and nurses and all the different resources that this community have, that's the point. The county council, for example, who are working really hard on these issues. So
I have a question for my council members, if I might. It just comes up out of what you said. I would like to ask, and I don't want them to answer, it's rhetorical, but I wonder why the council hasn't joined this lawsuit. Why do the citizens of this town have to put up their own whatever and do all this effort? Please take that to your council meetings.
Well,
Please.
Today the purpose is trying to get information out. And I have to tell you that I personally think that the county council is, with this bill that's up, and we're going to talk about that some today, there's taken some really brave stands on this and trying to move this forward, okay? Let me move on and get to you in a second, if that's okay. So again, we looked at the things that have been found, again, in this school, where you guys are sitting right now, and a lot of this comes out of the Waimea Air Quality Study. Some of you guys showed up, I sat through it, Jerry sat through it, a lot of you guys showed up and sat through the study. If you don't know about it, let me tell you a little bit about it. It was essentially done through the University of Hawaii. It's because of quote-unquote odor incidents, where kids got sick or were smelling things and they were worried that it was causing children to get sick and go to the nurse and even leave. And either way, odor incidents is how it's characterized. There were two potential causes that were identified. One of those is stinkweed, and the other is pesticides. Okay? And the stinkweed was because there was a lot of stinkweed in these fields right here, and they wanted to rule that out or to figure out if that was playing a role. Okay? So again, I'm going to jump through this, but this was the actual objective, and it was to conduct air sampling, it was to look at pesticides, and then also to look at stinkweed, and then the important one, to conduct a qualitative analysis of chemicals in the ambient air. So let's identify the chemicals in the air. All right, you see number 4. And a quantitative analysis of the chemicals identified. That's a concentration measurement. And then we move on to 5 and 6, which is to estimate the exposure, and then to give the community information about those hazards. That's the stated purpose. Okay? It was a lot of different sort of people participated in this study. Waimea Canyon Middle School made its facilities and worked to allow these scientists to come in and do the work. We had, local citizen who participated in it. All these different people that wanted to make sure this was a good study. It also included the Hawaii Department of Agriculture and the agricultural community. By the way, these are not my slides. These are from the Waimea Canyon Air Quality Study slides, okay? Importantly, the Hawaii Department of Agriculture funded the pesticide aspect of this, and the county council funded the stinkweed aspect of this, okay? This is really the results. Before I get to that, let me make a point on that. So, say what you want about whether or not you think stinkweed is the cause. It was one of the reasons that people thought might be causing this, okay? So again, the county council stood up, said let's contribute money to it and figure out if that's got something to do with it, all right? And the way they went about it is they identified all the chemicals, and I spoke with Dr. Lee who did this study. They identified all the chemicals in stinkweed. They reduced it down. They then did passive and higher concentration ambient air sampling to determine if those chemicals were being found. And then they also identified pesticides, and they tested for pesticides. And the results were, for Waimea, Kauai, there were 5 pesticides found: DDT, BHC, chlorpyrifos, bifenthrin, and metolachlor. And then in Honolulu, well, the North Shore, is basically BHC and DDT. Now, BHC and DDT are what a lot of people call legacy pesticides. These things, once you use them, last a long, long time. They could be blowing from the other side of the world. They could have been used years ago, okay? And they're still showing up today, which maybe says something about what we're doing today with respect to pesticides. DDT is not used anymore, that I know of around here, but it's still showing up in the school. That's the point. And importantly, bifenthrin, metolachlor, chlorpyrifos was found here, where there's a heavy ag community, and not found in Honolulu, okay? Where there's not the same concentration of agricultural fields. Now, bifenthrin is used in corn agriculture, but it can also be used as a termaticide and in termite treatments when they tint homes, that kind of thing. Chlorpyrifos and metolachlor are also used in corn agriculture, but chlorpyrifos can also be found in other things. You know, sometimes little roach traps, ant traps, it's in a little bait. It's inside that you put inside your house, okay? So there are some other potential sources for these pesticides. These are the actual concentrations. I'm not going to really dwell on this, except to say that, again, the ag ones that are potentially from ag were found in Waimea, not in Honolulu. The DDT and the BHC, these are the first two, pretty similar levels in both communities. And if you look at the MITC, that's the stinkweed chemical, the one chemical really identified in stinkweed was essentially found in same levels in both communities, closely. So here's the summary. This is where we get to the actual, well, this is, go ahead.
Can you go back to the previous slide, please?
Sure.
What's the final number inside, 15,850?
Yeah, okay, so these are the California screening levels. And we can talk about those in a minute. Essentially what happened is, when they found these levels, they then compared them to the California health screening levels. Sometimes they're called chisels. Either way, they're the health screening levels. And they basically said these concentrations in the air were way below the California health screening levels, and so it's okay, right? It's basically what they said. Here's the summary. The concentrations of the pesticides and MITC were well below health concern exposure limits and applicable screening levels. Again, this is not my slide. None of these black slides are my slide. That's the conclusion. Now the assumption, though, is that they tested for the pesticides actually used, right? That they tested for pesticides, there's a group found, these are the ones found, these are the risks. If you actually get deeper into the study, you guys probably can't see this, it says, we compiled a list of pesticides to study, restricted use pesticide sales records from 2010, 2011, were used to compile a list. They added to that list known and those thought to have been used historically from this evaluation of pesticide problems in Hawaii. And then based on these historical records, reports, and sales, 24 pesticides were selected for analysis, okay? So Waimea, this air quality study, 24 pesticides were selected for analysis. Again, if those are the 24 that are being used, everything's great, okay? Everything's great. If they're actually testing for the chemicals that are actually being used, it sounds to me like we're making progress, right? If you actually look at the 24 pesticides, and this is something I did myself when I pulled out the study, I could identify 6 that were actually being used compared to the pioneer pesticides on the list. Now remember, the pioneer pesticide list you're going to get soon, closer to 60 active ingredients, roughly 90 different formulations. And this study tested 24. Of those 24, I may have, like I said, I could have made a mistake, but these are the 6, essentially, that just from looking at it, I know for sure, or that are being used up on Pioneer. And out of those 6, 3 have turned up where we're sitting. Atrazine, metolachlor, or pyrifos. Okay? This is just a follow-up. I'm gonna bring these all up, but the salad bowls, the inverted salad bowls at the top, there were 2 types of tests that were ran. One was what's called a high volume air sampler. It's where you pull air with a pump, and then you test the disc. It's pulled through, there's different mediums, but you test what's pulled into the actual test apparatus from an air pump. The other thing is where you take salad bowl A, and you put this this disc inside, and you take salad bowl B and you put it on top and you hang it, and it sits out for days, weeks, months, depending upon the test procedure. What this basically says, this talks about what this test is good for. And it says the introduction of xenobiotic chemicals that are generally referred to, this is the key thing, the persistent toxic substances. Later these are identified what are called POPs, persistent organic pollutants. These are stable in the environment, they undergo long-range atmospheric transport, and can bioaccumulate through the food chain. So this test procedure is designed to test for these POPs, okay? Stable in the environment, long-range transport. The key issue there is stable in the environment. If you have a pesticide that is not very stable in the environment, then this is not necessarily the test you want to run to find it. Okay? That's not saying this is a bad test. It's just saying it's not the best test for some of the kinds of pesticides that are being used. In fact, if you look at the bottom, you guys probably want to see this, but it says low sensitivity to accidental short time changes in the concentration of pollutants is a basic characteristic of passive air samplers. They provide information about the long-term contamination of the studied environmental compartment, for example, air. So again, what this salad bowl is used for is to talk about the long-term environmental contamination. And it's testing for chemicals like DDT, like chlorpyrifos, that are persistent organic pollutants that stay around a long time, okay? This is not a test, necessarily, for chemicals that come out quickly, have an impact, or change, and then basically you're very tough to find after that point, okay? So I guess what I'm saying is that what Dr. Lee did, and I think he did a good job of what he was looking for, is they essentially found what they were looking for, but it doesn't look for everything. And my question, which is really more for the Department of Agriculture, is if the Department of Agriculture is in charge of the pesticide piece of this, and it's the agricultural community and the Department of Agriculture that has identified pesticides as a potential cause, why in the world do they not test and know all the pesticides that are being used? Why is it 24 compared to just on what we've got, 60 or so active ingredients being used up on the hillside? Okay, but let's focus real quick. Sorry, yes, Councilman, I know.
When you think it's appropriate, I'd like to share some additional information about this study.
Okay, I think
When do you think it's appropriate?
I would love that. And you know, I didn't participate in the study. You know, when I read this study, what I see is there's some people who worked real hard to try to do the best job they could and did a good job for what they did. For example, the stinkweed component, I've never seen that done, but I think it was really thorough. And it really, I mean, the money that was spent from the county council shows that essentially the levels are consistent, right? But this pesticide piece, in my opinion, was not done. Yeah. Councilman, do you want to share about that right now?
Yeah. When these incidents happened in Waimea, council was concerned. Council reached out to the health department, the pesticide, told, hey, what's happening in our community? Aren't you supposed to regulate this stuff, protect us? They said they didn't have any money to do the study. They didn't have any money. They got pressure from council members, particularly Councilmember Raposo at the time. Hey, this is our community. We need to know what's going on here. They came to the council and basically said, well, we got authorized to spend some money to study pesticides, but we think the stinkweed's involved and we don't have any money for that. So county, will you give us money to study stinkweed? And this is all in our transcripts from 2008. We had extensive discussion with them about how the study would be done. And our response, me personally, was, well, wait a minute. What people are concerned about is an acute exposure. Spraying happened upwind, and it drifted, and that's the concern. And so what are you going to do to study that? And they agreed, and I said, you know, the only way we're going to fund the stinkweed study is if you study the ambient air and acute exposure. In that contract, they were supposed to meet with the council again, supposed to do lots of things that they never did. 4 years went by, they come present this study, they didn't even do the acute study. And as you've just shown, they didn't even do test ambient for those types of chemicals. So I'm really angry. I think they violated our contract. I think we were sold a bill of goods, and the health department was in on the fix. So this is really
Thank you for sharing. I mean, from looking at this stuff, that's pretty evident that the county, I mean, what they put money into really was spent, and there is a real conclusion that tells you some stuff about what they put their money on to figure out on the stinkweed. But on the pesticide piece, you know, there's some conclusions that can be drawn. And someone said after the Waimea air quality study meeting, and I said, well, we know one thing, we know stinkweed's stinky, and we know pesticides are found in this school. And right now, that's the key. Pesticides are found in this school. And the next question becomes, where are they coming from? And that seems to be the logical place to go is, yeah, there are some other explanations for chlorpyrifos, atrazine, metolachlor. You could come up with some other theoretical ideas. I'll tell you, for my money, the most likely explanation is agricultural use of pesticides. It's the dominant user. It's the most prone to off-site transport. And in a little bit, we're going to talk about they're the ones with the responsibility to make sure that this shouldn't be happening. This shouldn't be upon the council. This shouldn't be upon the community. So, yes?
Agriculture did admit to was that stinkweed, because property are similar to pesticides. And I was thinking, maybe they grow the stinkweed there, put the pesticides into the stinkweed. That's a different thing.
You know, it's possible. I tell you this much, is that the stinkweed chemical, the MITC that was identified, was pretty much the same levels in both communities, right? But Honolulu didn't have kids going to, leaving school, right? So you can't say today, test in the air today, what happened back then. There's no way to do that. But if you're gonna put money, if you're gonna do a study, if you're gonna do a test on these kind of chemicals, you wanna make sure that it's actually answering the questions that you're posing. And a question, remember we looked at the proposal for that study to determine the pesticides that are in the air and determine the concentrations and to tell you about the risk. That's not yet been completed. Meaning they completed it, but it wasn't done it didn't actually provide what it claimed it was gonna do. Now again, why is this important? We're gonna keep going back to that theme today. This is an article after the atrazine sort of conference we had where we brought speakers in. It was talking about atrazine and there are articles about it. This is an article, it was in spring of this year, March of this year. And there's a representation by DuPont Pioneer. Not sure if you guys can see this, but essentially says, couldn't comment on the active lawsuit. This is Lori Yoshida, a spokeswoman for DuPont Pioneer on Kauai. But she said that the company hasn't sprayed atrazine on its seed corn fields in several years, though it does use other chemicals. Okay? Everybody take a look at that date. This is March of 2013. This is what a pesticide, the spreadsheets look like, to give you an idea of how dense they are and how difficult it is to pull all the information out. You've got the dates, the fields, who applied. It does say where, but you don't know where unless you have the map that correlates to that number, right? And then it'll say what the chemical is and the amounts. Let me make this a little bit bigger. That's still not going to help much, is it? All right, so right there is atrazine and metolachlor, okay? Now, both found here, right? All right? That's this time last year. All right? That's why this is important. That's why this information is necessary, so the council and so that you guys can make decisions with actual information. Not on promises, not on representations, not on claims that we're good stewards and we love the Ohana and the Aina and all of this, but on actual information. So let's just talk. We don't have a lot of time today to talk about every chemical. We're going to talk about just a couple. One's chlorpyrifos. It's an organophosphate. It's an insecticide. Typically, it's also an herbicide. This chemical was restricted. This is some information. If you guys went to that Waimea Quality Health or the Waimea Canyon Middle School Air Quality Study meeting that we all attended, they said, hey, we found chlorpyrifos, but it's under the California health screening levels. Everything's okay, right? What was not said there is any information of what chlorpyrifos was. This is the EPA revised risk assessment from June of 2000. Chlorpyrifos use in schools, parks. Can you think you can see if we can pull this down? I'm going to read it. Chlorpyrifos use in schools, parks, and other settings. No, see if you can pull down the actual, or raise it. Yeah, maybe. See if you can pull it down. Where children may be exposed will be canceled. Okay? Indoor and outdoor areas where children will not be exposed. Sorry, this is basically, it's the only step that's allowed. I should have finished the slide. So the only time it's supposed to be allowed after this time frame is where children will not be exposed. This is the notice to retailers, January 2001. This agreement stops the sale, I'm seeing these slides and realizing, the sale of virtually all home use products, many other indoor and outdoor non-residential uses where children could be exposed as of December 2001. The reason is the EPA determined that chlorpyrifos is currently used does not provide an adequate margin of protection for children that are exposed to this chemical. I forget what the next slide is, but the important take home here is that June of 2000, 2001, this chemical was essentially either totally taken off the market or it was restricted only to uses where children were not supposed or could not be exposed. And that's a chemical that's being found here. Yep.
Just a real quick interjection here. Council member Yokimura, at the first reading, you had a question when those two scientists came up and testified as to whether or not any of the pesticides have been banned. I don't know if you recall that question. And the answer with respect to chlorpyrifos and it's exposing children is absolutely yes. You know, the fact that that chemical was found in this school, you know, and it's specifically banned in schools, should be sounding the alarm bells at the Department of Health, Department of Agriculture. I mean,
this isn't my slide. This is a slide from that night about how safe pesticides are. It was put on by the Hawaii Department of Agriculture. We all heard they're very regulated by the EPA. They're very targeted. There's strict requirements based on the use. This was the stuff that essentially we were told to make us feel good about the fact that there were pesticides in the school. If you look at the actual Hawaii training materials on these same chemicals though, for pesticide applicators, I don't know if you guys can see this in the back, I'll read it. Scientists, pesticide manufacturers, and the Environmental Protection Agency cannot yet be sure what the delayed effects of too much exposure to individual pesticides or combinations of pesticides may be. It may be years before there are clear answers on the effects of all the pesticides and combinations of pesticides in use today. Meanwhile, it makes good sense to reduce your exposure to all pesticides as much as possible. If you want to read about organophosphates, there's training materials on that. It talks about how these organophosphates, they inhibit cholinesterase. Small repeated exposures to these pesticides over several days or weeks may greatly reduce cholinesterase levels in the body. At that point, even a small exposure to a pesticide with relatively low cholinesterase inhibiting properties may trigger severe illness. Sorry. So again, this stuff, it's not safe, and it is in the school. If you don't want to take the state of Hawaii's word for it, you don't want to take my word for it, Pioneer tells its workers about these chemicals, and in their information it says, you know, pesticides can hurt you if it gets on your skin and your eyes, if you breathe them, if you swallow them. It can affect people in different ways. Children breathe more air per body weight because of how small they are, and the respiratory rates are higher. So they're not breathing for the amount they weigh, they're taking more air into their body than you or I, adults, okay? So pesticides have greater impacts for children. You know, pregnant women, fertility issues. The point is that testing a rat, or a rabbit, or dog, or whatever, and testing one does not provide you with great information about how it's going to impact all the differences you see in this room, from little kids, to women, to men, to adults, to children. Short-term effects, long-term effects. Chronic effects from pesticides, cancer, liver damage. Again, it's not my slide. There's far more than these. And again, the question on testing in the back is that when you actually look at these chemicals, and if you drew up a spreadsheet, and you had chemical A over here and B, C, D, and you had cancer, right? If you test, you test these on, again, rats typically often, maybe you'll see acute effects, you'll see cancer, you'll see tumors in the liver, this kind of thing. Maybe you test for other kinds of impacts, okay? But usually when you actually look at this area for reproductive toxicity, for endocrine impacts, for impacts to children, it's usually there's just big black holes, where there's not been sufficient tests ran. You just don't know. And you certainly don't know, as that State of Hawaii slide showed, what the impact's going to be in combination. Comment in the back.
I'm in the OBGYN position here at KVME, and I've been really frustrated being unable to answer my patients' questions about this thing, not even knowing what they're exposed to. I did learn about the chlorpyrifos, and so I thought, well, it's interesting, a lot of stuff through the National Institutes of Health and PubMed, doing literature search, and there's very little human information on reproduction in children. But one thing I'm truly fascinated with, that in their studies in rats, that they found that the metabolic effect of these on infant rats, was much greater than adults, simply because the offspring, what do you call them, the juvenile rats, are unable to metabolize. They don't have the enzymes to break this down the way that adult has. So you can't compare the adult effects and what may be a safe amount for an adult with what could be toxic for a juvenile. And so I just think there's as you're saying here, there's just so much here that we don't know. That I think the Bill 2491 is just a prudent step. Not anything radical, it's just a prudent step.
Doctor, I so appreciate you standing up for that, because, in fact, from someone that works with a lot of medical doctors, some in this field, some in other fields, what people often think is they think doctors are omniscient. They know everything about everything. They know they learn about all this in medical school. I see you shaking your head. The reality is the toxicology piece isn't really taught very deeply in medical school, and the reason is, if you break your leg and you go to the doctor, you want the doctor to fix the leg. You don't really care if it was off a bike or off a car or whatever happened, right? Causation is sometimes sort of secondary to actually helping people, right? And so a lot of doctors don't always have that same kind of training. A lot of doctors just as curious about this stuff, and that's why we're always talking to our clients and stuff about talking to your doctors and getting them information. And I tell you, I wish you were at the atrazine meeting that we did, or maybe you were, where Professor Hayes was talking about with atrazine, at least, because of these endocrine disruption properties. If you have young rats that are exposed to low levels of atrazine, I hope I paraphrase this correctly, but essentially that when these female rats grow up, because of the impact on their estrogen and it inhibits that, they'll have impacts to their mammary glands. And so then you'll see impacts to their children and their grandchildren, even if those children and grandchildren are never exposed to the chemical. So you expose these frogs that you test, and then you pull them out, never expose them again. Their children and then their grandchildren are going to have impacts from this chemical that were never exposed. It's pretty incredible. And the way it happens down through, all these different things. So I really appreciate you standing up on that. Again, let's talk to Pioneer about how to protect ourselves. You can all wear long pants, long sleeve shirts, shoes, and socks if you're up there working. You also need to stay out, and this is very important, stay out of areas where pesticides are being applied. If pesticides drift to where you're working, leave the area. Okay? Kids can't leave this school, right? People in Waimea can't leave their homes. And if you don't know, you can't leave your work. If you work here, that's right. So again, it's not my slide. So what am I going to do if you're exposed? Well, if you're breathing pesticide vapors, please get to fresh air as soon as possible. All those same things can't be done. So one of the other things we heard that night from the Hawaii Department of Agriculture, kept being repeated, the label is the law. This is a favorite catchphrase. The label is the law. We enforce the label. Label is state and federal law. Can't violate the label. related factors determine the potential for spray drift. The applicator is responsible for considering all of these factors when making the decision to apply this product. So again, I can't tell you that the chlorpyrifos we're breathing right now, exactly where it comes from, right? Where the metolachlor comes from. But if it's coming off site from these fields, I can tell you what I think the most likely explanation is, right? I think most people who live here, they'll tell you what they think the most likely explanation is. But the point is, these labels are supposed to prevent this stuff. And there's a distinction that seems to be being made here recently, which is that, oh, well, spray drift is just if you can see it drift. You know, when you spray it, the wind pushes it, that's spray drift, compared to what's called volatilization drift. Volatilization drift is if we pour out gasoline into a bowl on this table, and we pour out a bowl of water. So we got a bowl of water, bowl of gasoline on the table. That gasoline's more volatile, so it's going to evaporate faster. And then these fans that we're looking at, it's going to push that around. That's essentially volatilization drift. Pesticide, if it's being sprayed, you can't see it, the wind's pushing it, spray drift. Pesticide goes down, but it's volatile, and most of these are because they're either petroleum distillates, they're all sorts of reasons, they re-evaporate up, and they get pushed, all right? That's volatilization drift. It's a distinction, really without difference, because it's pesticide molecules being pushed in the air, into the school, into, as we breathe. That's the important thing. That's a good point. The comments could have laws, but they have to be enforced. This is a letter that we received from the community first, before we filed the lawsuit. Many of you guys, I think it was sent to every single home in this community. And it's from our adversaries, DuPont Pioneer. During our open house, employees provided an overview of what we do that benefits our employees, farmers, community, and the world. Pioneer discussed our community partnerships with organizations that share our core values of safety, ethical behavior, respect for people, and environmental stewardship.
Bullshit.
Okay, well, that's the letter that gets sent. And I'll just show you. This is what is said in court pleadings. This is recently. The use of agricultural pesticides, or chemicals, is by definition part of farming. And the essence of the Hawaii Right to Farm Act is that off-site impacts incident to farming are presumptively not tortious. Now, if you're not an attorney, all a tort is when someone else hurts somebody else. And what they're saying is that Hawaii law, the Right to Farm Act, that off-site impacts, if they're farming and they use chemicals and there's an off-site impact to this town, they're immune. That's what's being said in that sentence. And they're saying that they're protected by the Hawaii law. Well, that's if that were true, that's our job to try to beat that, right? That's our job. But look, one thing as an attorney, Jerry and I'll both tell you this, I can't guarantee a result for any of my clients. I've had very good arguments, very good cases, and that you can lose for a whole lot of reasons, right? You can't guarantee a result. You don't know how it's going to turn out. And you can't sit back and expect, civil litigation can do a lot of things. Today, I think is a great day for our community because we actually know what's being used. But you can't promise everybody that this is going to fix everything in the world, right? That's why you need the council. That's why you need leadership, okay, to make a difference. And one of these, and this is sort of a nice segue, I'm going to hand this over to Jerry, but why this bill on pesticides is important.
Thank you, Kyle. Many of our clients are sitting in the room today. And how do we know as attorneys, Kyle is right. You never know if you're going to win a case. I mean, you do your best, you work your hardest, but you have to believe in your case and you have to believe in your clients. And we believe in Waimea. We do. We believe these people, hardworking, good people, okay? And this is what they're telling us. They're telling us, and there are clients in the room that I'm quoting, people who are sitting in this room, okay? and if I'm wrong, call me on it. They're telling us that they hear the tractors at night. And when they hear the tractors at night, they can smell the chemical smells. It comes in their homes, they can smell it, their children are in bed. Okay? There's one couple in here that will tell you, they hear the tractors at night, they go outside with their flashlight. They shine the flashlight up in the sky and it's coming down like snowflakes, okay, onto this community. Okay? And many, I've sat through 64 depositions, well, almost 64. Kyle sat through some of them, of our clients. And client after client will testify under oath that they smell this sick, sweet odor that smells like bubble gum. Pioneer, I don't know if we brought a picture of bubble gum or not. Pioneer uses a masking agent called bubble gum. We have a picture of it taken right off of their field, okay? And what they do is they put this bubblegum masking agent into the pesticide tank, and they're trying to mask the smell of the chemicals. Now, why would anyone want to mask the smell if they're taking the position that their chemicals don't drift? If you can smell it, it's at your house. If you can smell it down the road, it's where you are. Okay? And that bubblegum is being smelled all over this community. And maybe Kyle can pull it up, you'll see what it is. And you can Google it. Anybody wants to go Google bubblegum masking agent, you see it's specifically made to mask chemical odors. And that's what they use. And client after client after client under oath testified they smelled it in the community. How is it getting there? Okay? How's it getting here to this school?
Were you guys able to subpoena whether they purchased that chemical or not, that bubblegum?
That picture is of a bottle of bubblegum that was taken right off of the Pioneer field. That is theirs.
But have you asked them whether or not they purchased that and injected in their spraying technique?
Yeah, they do.
And they agree that they do?
Yes.
So, isn't the smell in chemicals such as malathion by EPA standards? Supposedly, the smell is supposed to be part of the trigger that you smell? Isn't that part of why they have the smells in there? They don't, are they allowed by law to change the smell?
Well, what they're not allowed by law to do is to allow their chemicals to drift. Okay, off-site migration, off-target migration. And that's what's happening. It's happening routinely in this community. And just before we move into 2491, real quickly, and I'm not gonna belabor the point, but I'll take you through a couple of key provisions. What Kyle very competently pointed out to you, the Pioneer has a public face, environmental stewardship, and they have a private face, way down in the weeds of litigation, okay? What they're telling the court and the position they're taking is that we are immune. We can do anything up there. We're immune in deciding the right to farm act, and we just believe they're flat wrong. And so they're telling you guys one thing as a community and as a public, and they're telling the court something else. Now, Council, the bill 2491, there are people in this room that know that bill much better than I do. But I can tell you, in our reading of it, we think it's a good bill, and we support it. We think it's a great start. And by the way, we think it's a courageous start for this council. I think you guys have a really good county council. I mean, I really do. I've been in and around politics for most of my adult life, and I'm impressed. They listen, they show up at the meetings, they ask questions, and in the end, you watch, they're going to do the right thing. When you fight a fight like this, in our opinion, like Pioneer, this is a multi-billion-dollar corporation. That's a B, billion-dollar corporation. They are driven by profit motives. That's what they do. They're not people, they're a corporation. They have shareholders, they have a board of directors. That's what they do. When you fight a huge, powerful corporation like that, you have to fight them in different fronts. One, obviously, in the courts. You fight them in the courts. You fight them in the public opinion, in press, in talking to each other, how people begin to feel, how the anti-GMO marches are going on. You fight them there, okay? And you fight them in your democratic form of government. And this 2491 is a start. We have representatives that will listen. They're setting up public hearings. That hearing is set for the 31st of July, and I understand from Jerry DiPietro, it's at Kauai Community College.
Will our mayor be there?
I don't know. You certainly can,
Jervis,
what? Will Waimea be there? Did you say, or will our mayor? Our mayor. I don't know if the mayor is going to be there.
What did I talk about on the political help? Asking him and all the business that did this, and all the plays and all this and that, and for him not to be here today is shameful.
You know, that's the beauty of a democracy. You get to email his office, call him, tell him what you think. And you know, and I think that's a good thing. I think communication with your public officials is how it's supposed to work, you know? So 2491, it is a really good bill, and we support it, and we hope you show up at the public hearing and you let your public officials know that you support it. There are a lot of interesting features. You know, we have the buffer zone feature. We saw the buffer zone potential issue here today. I personally think that the buffer zone is really going to depend on the particular circumstances and facts germane to a particular site. For instance, if you're downwind, okay, 500 feet might not be enough. I don't know. I mean, how far are we from the Pioneer Fields right now? And the government's test results are showing pesticides showing up in this school. Would 500 feet be enough there? I don't know. But that's the kind of information that you need to take to the public hearing. But what's really interesting to me is that this lawsuit is not only about pesticide drift and off-site migration of pesticides. It's about dust, okay? And dust, if it's fine enough, there's a way they measure dust. Particulate matter 10 and below. If it's fine enough, dust can cause cancer, can cause heart disease, can cause respiratory issues, can cause birth defects. And every single one of our clients, and we've spoken to them all, and like I said, those 64 are under oath. It's like they got together the night before and they worked out a script. When the defense attorneys for Pioneer asked them, how often is dust a problem? Every day. Where do you find dust in your home? Everywhere. Do you keep your windows open? They live in lockdown. They're scared for their children. When they put their children to bed at night, and they flip the sheets to put the keiki under the sheets, the dust plume comes out from the bed. They have their rice cooker and their electric can opener and their little electric appliances all wrapped up in plastic bags. It's horrible. And it's not only horrible because it's incredibly inconvenient when you think about living in a situation like that, but it's unhealthy. And it's every day. It's every day. And during the windy season and the dry season, it's unbearable. They're afraid to let their kids go out in the yard and roll around in the grass. They don't know what's in that dust. They're afraid to go in the backyard and light up their barbecue. You see my clients nodding over here. They don't want to be exposed in the food. I mean, they're scared to death. Their quality of life, their ability to do a simple thing like open their windows and enjoy the trade winds has been taken away. Now, to me, I mean, I'm not a genius, but it seems to me like that's a fundamental right in this country and in this state. To enjoy your home, be able to enjoy your property, live your life. These guys go to work, they come home, they're tired, the windows are locked, I mean, they're hot. It's horrible. And they cannot keep up with the cleaning. How many people have told me, Mrs. Nagata, how many people have told me, I cannot keep up already. I'm tired. Every day, you clean here, you turn around, the next spot is dust. So, why am I talking about dust? A, it's unhealthy. B, it's incessant. C, it takes away the quality of life, and it's impacting our children, okay? And D, it's addressed in Bill 2491. This is what an opportunity for us. If you look at, you may not have the bill in front of you. I do. Under the permitting section, which is section 22.9, the council is, in this bill, talking about creating a permitting process, okay, which would limit part of being able to get a permit to do the kind of work that these people do, would be able to show that the fugitive dust drift is being limited, okay? And how we're gonna know all of these things and the limitations and all of that? Well, there's an EIS, an environmental impact statement, that's proposed in the bill. I think that's just an incredible opportunity for this island to find out, really do a good EIS and really find out what's going on. And then let your government officials use that as a tool. We're not gonna be guessing at them. We're gonna know. And then there's a rule promulgation section, which simply means that they can promulgate rules, which is kind of like the operator's manual. You know, not every time they want to change it, they have to go back and you know, and change amend the ordinance. It's a relatively simple procedure. It's how I revised, well, it's chapter 91, an administrative rule promulgation. And that's in the bill. And then there's a penalties provision. If they don't do what they're supposed to do, in other words, if they represent it to the government, we're gonna do X, Y, and Z, you give us our permit, so we can go do GMO stuff. And then they don't do what they're supposed to do, there's a penalty provision in there. And you know, there are a lot of really interesting features, and I just think that this is,
Jail time. That's what I like.
what's that?
Jail time.
Execution.
Let them eat their own food.
Well, you know, I'm just looking here, I think there's a criminal penalty in addition to a civil fine, yes?
Jerry, haven't you got enough information to take this to an injunction? And if you do, how can we help?
Well, an injunction is much more difficult, much more hard to do than to talk about. The standard is really difficult. And we do have a claim for injunctive relief in our complaint. But we're in the process, you remember that book or the movie Moby Dick? You remember when Captain Ahab speared the white whale, and then the rope from the harpoon wrapped around Captain Ahab, and the whale went up, and the whale went down, and he went down with the whale? That's what Kyle and I are doing right now, okay? Pioneer is a white whale. They're powerful, they're strong, they're rich, their resources are limitless, okay? And we have to go through this litigation process and get to the point where we can try to bring that before the court. I mean, we have a whole bunch of other claims in the complaint as well, but injunctive relief is certainly one of them. I don't believe at this point, I think that's the kind of thing, you don't want to pull the trigger and miss the bullseye. You know, when you shoot, you want to hit, you know? So we're not quite there yet, but we certainly do have a lot of information. Yes?
My question is, and I almost hate to broach this, however, with these multiple sprayings, and we're actually at the infancy. If you read about Superfund toxic waste cleanup sites, this is how it starts with community action. Do you believe we could be a Superfund toxic waste cleanup site by the EPA because this 10 years, 15 years on these persistent pesticides and herbicides? That's my question. I mean, because this is how it starts. They have over 50, they're responsible for over 50 Superfund toxic waste sites in the United States for Monsanto chemicals.
Why are they in business?
Well, there are probably some people more qualified to answer that than me, first off, to be honest with you. But
Is there a possibility?
I don't know. And I gotta be honest with you, I don't know. I think, I want to make a point. We want to take some of these questions. I want to make, to some extent, something that I saw going on. I was at that meeting for the bill 2491. We didn't have the chance to testify, unfortunately, because we had to take our flight back, right? But hopefully we'll get a chance to at the next. And the thing that I saw there, which was really great, is these C Corp companies, I think, let their people out of business, or let them out of work that day, right? So you had a lot of people in their t-shirts from Pioneer. Guys, that's a good thing, okay? We are not their enemies. You are not their enemies. That's democracy. Those people are afraid for their jobs. They're afraid for their families, for their future. They want to keep their jobs. There is nothing but honor in that stance, being worried about your job and your family and want to make sure you know where your food's coming from and where your money's coming from, you know? Okay? They're not our enemy. And on the other hand, we've got the community. It's worried about health. We have the whole island that's worried about health and the health consequences. And the way this is being portrayed is jobs on one hand, or do we have health on the other? You know, we can't have both. Look, listen, and this is the point I want to make. I'm going to see the council's got some questions. It's a false choice. Those are important questions, okay? But that's a false choice. You got to have good leadership to answer those kind of questions. And good leaders need information to make good decisions. This bill's about information. It's not about throwing people out of work. It's not about making everybody healthy, really. It's about getting information so then we can make decisions, really so you guys can make decisions and the council can make decisions on a going forward basis. And I'm bringing it back to your question, which is, if you do an environmental impact statement, if you take a look at how far these chemicals go in the air and stuff, then you're going to have some actual answers about where these chemicals come from in the school that we're breathing today. So let me just make one last point on this, is that, so at these meetings, no one wants to take people's jobs. In fact, we want these seed corn company workers to stand up with us, to say, we want our companies to disclose pesticides, right? If it's safe, we want them to have jobs, and we also want to know what you're spraying. And if a company won't tell you the chemicals that it's using, or if they try to threaten you that we're going to fire your people if you force us to tell you the kind of chemicals we use, well, then you can make a decision of whether or not that's a company you want in your community. So I tell you what, there are so many questions. I want to get to a real important part, which is I do have a handout for everybody. Like I said, I hope everyone's got enough. We do want to talk to people, and I know there's a lot of expertise and ideas and all of this in the room. If you guys don't mind, can I get the handout to everybody, and I'll put the mic down, and then we can actually we can talk with people individually. Is that
Okay.
okay? I haven't yet. We haven't yet. But if Kia raised your hand, if you see Kia down here, if you give her your email and if you want the list, we can certainly, or pardon me, this list of pesticides, and we also have it right here.
Oh, it's just the list that was that's already at the.
Oh no, let me show you it to you. I should have flashed it up. You're gonna need glasses. I apologize. There's a lot of chemicals. It's hard to fit on one page. It's the chemicals, it's the active ingredients, and then by active ingredients, the classifications. So that you guys can then take this home and you can get online and you can say, okay, this is what's being used. Let's find out about, chlorpyrifos. Maybe, yeah.
So what did you do to get this list? Take a long time.
Yeah, well, in litigation, you file what's called a request for production, and you ask for documents, and that takes time. And these are literally thousands. How many records have been produced? 100-something thousand documents in the case, so thousands and thousands of records. Some of this is electronically, finally, that we got, and we had fights in front of the federal court over in Oahu, and then it was designated as confidential, and then we challenged that. The confidentiality was released by DuPont Pioneer. So this has been a long time coming. That's how you get it. That's how you get it. And again, one of the reason why Waimea has it is because Waimea stood up. So with that, guys, again, you want to
Just again, I want to thank everybody. Please come up and ask questions, especially our council members. Thank you so much for coming out. I think that gives Waimea a big comfort level. Thank you.